The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, wedged between a broadband equipment catalog and a coupon mailer Hank Drummer had never subscribed to. He stood at the end of his gravel driveway in slippers, squinting at the return address, Longwood Estates Homeowners Association, CO President D. Cartwell, and felt the particular kind of confusion that only comes when reality contradicts something you've verified repeatedly and deliberately. He brought it inside, set it on the kitchen counter beside his coffee mug, and read it twice before calling out to his wife. "Gina, come look at this." She appeared from the home office down the hall, laptop tucked under one arm, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She took the letter, read it once. Gina rarely needed to read anything twice, and immediately pulled up the Kellerman County parcel viewer on her laptop. She'd bookmarked it years ago, back when they were still shopping for the house, and wanted to triple-check the property boundaries. "Our southern boundary line ends 14 feet beyond their marker post," she said, zooming into the overhead parcel map. "We are not, by any legal definition, part of Longwood Estates HOA." "I know," Hank said. "This bill says we owe $480 in annual dues plus a $35 processing fee." "I know, plus a $25 late fee, even though this is the first notice we've ever received." Hank nodded slowly and sipped his coffee. He was a network engineer by profession, which meant he spent his days troubleshooting systems where a single, misrouted packet could cascade into catastrophic failure. He had learned, through experience, never to react to the first anomaly. Document it, watch it, understand the full topology of the problem before touching anything. He tucked the letter into a manila folder, labeled it with the date, and went to work. The second letter arrived 3 weeks later. This one included a bolded line about outstanding balances and mentioned, almost casually, that continued non-payment could result in property action. The language was vague in the way that bad faith legal threats usually are, designed to frighten without committing to anything specific. Hank photographed it, added it to the folder, and drafted a brief certified response. He kept it polite and factual. His property was not within HOA jurisdiction per recorded county parcel maps, and he was not subject to the association's governing documents, CC&Rs, or fee schedule. He included the parcel map reference number and mailed it with a return receipt requested. The receipt came back signed. 2 weeks later, so did a third letter. This one had Denise Cartwell's signature in blue ink, bold and swooping, the handwriting of someone who enjoyed signing documents. Hank watched Gary from the porch, coffee in hand, expression neutral. When Gary finally drove away, Hank retrieved his own camera from inside and photographed the tire tracks. Gary had left on the public easement. Then he photographed his fence, his property markers, and the HOA boundary post 14 feet south of his line. Then he downloaded the parcel data as a PDF, signed and certified, and added it to what was now a growing accordion file. Gina, watching him return inside, raised an eyebrow. "She's not going to stop, is she?" "Probably not," Hank agreed. "Good," Gina said, in a tone that her husband had learned over 11 years of marriage to take very seriously. Denise Cartwell was not accustomed to being ignored. She had served as HOA president of Longwood Estates for 6 consecutive years, a tenure she described in neighborhood conversations as stewardship and her critics described as occupation. She had the particular confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged, and when Hank Drummer's certified response arrived declining to pay dues he didn't owe, she interpreted it not as a legal rebuttal, but as a personal affront. She took it to the neighborhood Facebook group. The post went up on a Thursday evening. It didn't name Hank directly, but it described a property adjacent to Longwood Estates, whose owner has refused to comply with community standards and association obligations, and it invited residents to discuss the impact non-compliant neighbors have on property values and community cohesion. The post included a photograph of Hank's fence, Gary's work, taken at an angle that made it look slightly more weathered than it actually was. 47 comments followed by mourning. Most were vague expressions of concern from residents who didn't fully understand the situation. Several were more pointed. One commenter wrote that people who don't want to follow the rules should move somewhere else, which was a remarkable statement given that Hank had no rules to follow and hadn't moved anywhere. Hank's neighbor across the street, a retired electrician named Marcus Webb, texted him a screenshot before he'd even seen it. "She's going after you online now," Marcus wrote. "This lady has lost her mind." Hank thanked him, screenshotted the post on his own phone for documentation purposes, and resisted the urge to respond publicly. Gina, however, had already opened a new browser tab. She's escalating because she thinks embarrassment will work where the letters didn't, Gina said. "Let her. Every move she makes is a data point." "You're enjoying this," Hank observed. "I'm strategizing," she corrected, not looking up. Gina Drummer had spent 15 years in cybersecurity, which meant she understood two things deeply: how systems were supposed to work and how people tried to exploit them when they thought no one was watching. She approached the Longwood Estates situation the way she approached any adversarial network: methodically, patiently, and with the specific goal of understanding the full attack surface before making a move. She started with public records. The Kellerman County Register of Deeds maintained digitized filings going back decades: HOA incorporation documents, amendment filings, annual renewals, dissolution records. All of it was technically public, theoretically accessible, and practically ignored by anyone who didn't know to look. Gina knew to look. She found the Longwood Estates HOA incorporation from 14 years ago. She found amendment filings from years 2 and 5. She found dues, increased notifications, and covenant revisions. And then, scrolling through the chronological filing history, she found a gap. The HOA's mandatory annual renewal filing, required by state statute to maintain active legal status, had not been submitted 18 months ago. There was a grace period of 60 days. There was a reinstatement process available within 12 months. Both windows had passed. Longwood Estates Homeowners Association had been legally dissolved by administrative lapse for 18 months. Gina sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she opened a second browser tab and started pulling the county lien records. In the 18 months since dissolution, 14 liens had been placed on properties within Longwood Estates, all bearing the HOA's name, all signed by Denise Cartwell as president, all representing a legal authority that had ceased to exist. She cross-referenced them against the county property records, identified the affected homeowners, and built a spreadsheet. She brought it to Hank at 9:30 that evening. He read it, set it down, and was quiet for almost a full minute. "She's been operating a dissolved HOA and placing liens with no legal authority," he said. "For 18 months, Gina confirmed. "And collecting dues?" "Oh, the dues are the interesting part." She pulled up a second sheet. "I cross-referenced the dues increase she announced last year against the HOA's maintenance contracts. The neighborhood pool was resurfaced 3 years ago. The entrance landscaping contract expired and wasn't renewed. There have been no capital expenditures logged in public records since the dissolution." Hank looked at the numbers. "Where's the money going?" Gina met his eyes. "That's what I haven't been able to find yet. It started with Marcus. He appeared at Hank's door on a Saturday morning with coffee in hand, and a look on his face that suggested he'd been working up to this conversation for a while. He'd been following the Facebook drama, he said. He'd had his own suspicions about the HOA for a couple of years. He'd paid a fine 2 summers ago for a garbage placement violation that he'd never been able to get documented proof of. When he'd asked for the specific bylaw citation in writing, Denise had gone cold and the conversation had ended. He wanted to know what Hank was doing about all of it. Hank invited him inside and introduced him to the accordion file. Over the following 2 weeks, 3 more neighbors came. A young couple, the Okafor Brennans, who had received a lien notice they couldn't understand and couldn't afford an attorney to fight. A woman named Patricia Solis, who had been on the HOA's original founding board and had quietly resigned 4 years ago after what she described carefully as disagreements over financial transparency. And a soft-spoken man named Owen Chen, who said almost nothing during the conversation but handed Hank a manila envelope before he left, containing 2 years of receipts for HOA dues he'd paid by check. all cashed into an account whose routing number, he'd recently noticed, didn't match anything on the HOA's publicly filed banking disclosures. The most significant visitor arrived without announcement. Her name was Rosalind Park. She had served as the HOA treasurer for 3 years before stepping down 8 months ago. She was in her early 60s, precise in her speech, and she had brought her own folder, thicker than Hank's. She sat at the kitchen table, accepted a glass of water, and said without preamble, "I kept copies of everything. I want to know if you're actually going to do something with this information, because if you're going to do something, I will help you. But I need to know you're serious before I put myself in her crosshairs." Gina slid the county records printout across the table. Rosalind looked at it. Something shifted in her expression, relief maybe, or vindication. "She never told the board the organization had lapsed," Rosalind said quietly. "I don't think most of them know. I found out by accident when I tried to file an amendment and the county sent a rejection notice. When I brought it to Denise, she told me it was a clerical issue being handled. 2 weeks later, I was voted off the board at a special meeting. I wasn't notified about." She paused. "I have the original bank account records. I have the secondary account she opened, and I have the transfer logs." She opened her folder. Hank retained an attorney, a calm, methodical woman named Eleanor Strauss, who specialized in HOA law and had, in her words, a complicated professional relationship with HOA abuse cases. She reviewed every document, interviewed each neighbor, and conferred with Rosalind at length. At the end of 10 days, she came back with a summary that was simultaneously damning and unsurprising. Denise Cartwell had continued operating and representing the HOA as a legal entity for 18 months after dissolution. She had collected over $67,000 in dues during that period. She had placed 14 liens on properties using authority she no longer possessed. She had opened a secondary account in the HOA's name without board authorization or transparency and had transferred approximately $41,000 into it over the course of 2 years. The funds had since migrated, in increments small enough to avoid automatic reporting thresholds, to a personal account. The formal legal phrase for this, Eleanor explained, was fraud. The liens were the most immediately actionable issue. 14 families had clouds on their property titles that had no legal standing. 4 of them had been unable to refinance or sell because of them. 1 family had lost a mortgage rate lock. Eleanor filed in Kellerman County District Court on a Tuesday, 11 weeks after the first certified letter had arrived in Hank's mailbox. The plaintiffs included Hank Drummer, 11 of his Longwood Estates neighbors, and Rosalind Park as a cooperating witness. The case alleged fraudulent lien placement, misappropriation of association funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and operation of a dissolved legal entity. The county district attorney's office, which had received a courtesy copy of the filing, along with Rosalind's financial documentation, opened a separate inquiry the following Monday. Denise Cartwell arrived at the Kellerman County Courthouse on a gray November morning dressed in a blazer, the color of authority, and accompanied by a lawyer whose primary qualification appeared to be that he had answered his phone. She moved through the lobby with the bearing of someone who had never seriously imagined losing, which Hank found, in an anthropological sense, genuinely fascinating. He and Gina sat at the plaintiff's table and said very little. Eleanor Strauss, by contrast, said a great deal. She presented the county dissolution records with the precision of someone who had argued this type of case before and knew exactly which documents made. Opposing attorneys go pale. She walked the court through the lien timeline, the banking records, the secondary account, the transfer log. She introduced Rosalind's testimony, which was composed and devastating. She introduced Owen Chen's cancelled checks and the account discrepancy. She introduced the Facebook post and the manufactured property compliance visit as evidence of a pattern of intimidation. Denise's attorney objected 11 times. The judge sustained 2 of those objections. When Eleanor introduced the dissolution certificate and asked Denise directly, under oath, whether she had been aware the association had lost its legal standing, the courtroom went very quiet. Denise said she had not been aware. Eleanor then introduced the county rejection notice that had been mailed to Denise's home address 18 months prior, with a delivery confirmation signature. Denise's attorney requested a brief recess. The judge denied it. The ruling came the same afternoon. All 14 liens were voided. The court found the HOA had operated as a dissolved entity, and that all enforcement actions taken during that period were without legal standing. Denise Cartwell was ordered to appear at a financial disclosure hearing within 30 days. The matter was formally referred to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Hank watched Denise walk out of the courtroom and thought she looked, for the first time since this had all started, like someone who finally understood the consequences of her choices. It was not a satisfying sight in the way he had expected. It was quieter than that, more like watching a system finally return to a correct state after a long misconfiguration. He found that professionally familiar. The Longwood Estates HOA did not survive the proceedings. Its legal dissolution was now a matter of public record and public knowledge, and the community's appetite for reconstituting it under any form of Cartwell-adjacent leadership was precisely zero. A small group of residents, led by Marcus Webb and Patricia Solis, began the process of forming a new voluntary neighborhood association, transparent finances, elected board, publicly posted meeting minutes, optional membership. The early conversations were reportedly more civil than any HOA meeting in recent memory. The 14 fraudulent liens were formally vacated within 3 weeks of the ruling. The family that had lost a mortgage rate lock filed a separate civil claim against Denise personally. The district attorney's office moved deliberately but publicly, and by late January, local news coverage confirmed that Denise Cartwell had been charged with felony fraud, theft by deception, and misuse of fiduciary authority. Her attorney, to no one's particular surprise, filed a motion to withdraw from the case shortly thereafter. Gary, the compliance consultant, was not charged with anything. He had apparently been hired legitimately, told only that he was photographing a non-compliant property and had no awareness of the broader fraud. Hank bore him no particular ill will. He did, however, note with some amusement that Gary had parked partially on the public easement during his visit, which was technically a municipal code violation. He had chosen not to report it. Some details he felt didn't need to become documents. The first genuinely warm Saturday in March, Hank Drummer sat on his porch in a canvas chair with a cold beer and nothing particular to do. The neighborhood was quiet in the particular way that feels earned rather than empty. Kids on bikes drifting down the cul-de-sac, someone 3 houses over running a lawnmower in unhurried Saturday passes, Marcus Webb waving from his driveway. Gina came out with her own drink and settled into the chair beside him. Rosalind called, she said. The financial disclosure hearing got pushed to April, but the DA's office told her it's moving forward. They found 2 more accounts. Hank nodded and looked out at the street. The HOA boundary post was still there, 14 feet south of his property line, though it no longer had any legal significance. He'd thought about asking the county to remove it. He'd decided to leave it. It seemed useful to have a visible marker of where jurisdiction ended and personal sovereignty began. You know what I keep thinking about, he said. What? How many people got those same letters and just paid? He rolled the beer bottle between his palms because it was easier, because fighting it seemed like too much trouble, because she'd built something that looked official, enough that nobody thought to check. Gina was quiet for a moment. That's how most of these things work. They depend on people not checking. He nodded slowly. Yeah, a kid on a bicycle rattled past the end of the driveway, standing on the pedals for a brief moment of effortless velocity, then disappeared around the curve. The lawnmower down the street stopped and then started again. Good neighborhood, Hank said. Better than it was, Gina agreed. He thought about certified letters and accordion, files and spreadsheets and courtrooms. He thought about all the ordinary machinery of accountability that most people assumed existed somewhere but rarely saw actually working. He thought about the particular, quiet satisfaction of watching a corrupted system get corrected, not by rage or retaliation, but by documentation, patience, and the simple unwillingness to pretend that wrong things were right. Then he finished his beer and went inside to start the grill because it was Saturday, and some things were more important than reflecting on victories. The neighborhood settled into its evening, free, functional, and finally blessedly quiet.